Nyeba gunle namdol shing yunde gunge kembabu simje gunge nyen jekbo tamje kenla gun chan Omen jege yenge bodane dusum sange gunge ngogo ni rasim jugu ngusumaden zebe Saive lame shabla so wande. Dambiche nyamsulimbe kunlung sangbo ngijungi sampadang janchuki simtang tempe koni dambiche tebatang sambe nyamsulimba shu.
Please start by giving rise to excellent motivation, that of renunciation and the mind of awakening bodhicitta. With that then motivation, please think that now you will engage in the Dharma practice, the duration of these teachings, and then with that spirit, please listen to the teachings.
Tantani nganzo lungi che tenju Gyud Lama de tosam jebe kabre. Tade nani khasa nganzo tenju ki tsenla tekpa chenpo Gyud Lama tenju seni donda sumyebe nani tene nganzo tenju se di de shugure. Ta de kapsula tini tenju ki chele tso di chö bare se de chö sinanda nganzo gyuwa tepa chele segure. So lunga yisum ki nani sem ki gyuwa tepa tela tini chö segure se. Ta de labdu tini da nganzo sem la chö guguye na tini kandes chö gugure se labyong tu lam ki rimba chila tini chö gugure se. Tan dele tuni tini khasa nganzo chachi malam ki nangla sung yobe lam ki rimba ki tunda neka dago namba ngay tsudala tini nganzo shugure. Ta de nani khasa tangbo lam ki ten se di lam ki ten punsum soba se di kandichi gugure se yondu tini dajuru chodo dejun sherab tin shenyin sang tin dambi jutob tsushin rubla parche machi par sarab kundu damchur chobra sho se digi shusimbare. Diring tini nipa antini marimba nipa tindu shuye ins.
In this Dharma session, we are concerned with the Dharma of Scriptural transmission, that is the treatise known as Gyud Lama or Uttara Tantra Shastra, and we engaging with this treatise by means of receiving teachings and reflecting on the meaning of these teachings. So in the previous Dharma sessions, what we have been looking at, the meaning of the title that consists of 3 parts. So we have the part of Mahayana, or the great vehicle, the part of Uttara Tantra, or the highest continuum, and the part of Shastra, or the treatise. And so we reached the explanation of this last term of the title, Shastra in Sanskrit, or treatise, commentary in English. And as I have already explained, this term Shastra or treatise has a few functions. Primarily, the function of a treatise is to transform our mind stream. Of course, it also changes our body, our behavior, what we say with our speech, but mainly it really changes our mindset. And so the question that we have asked in the last sessions is then, if we want to transform our minds, how should we go about it? And the answer to that was that we need to follow the correct stages of the path. And that's where we have, kind of went into explanation of the 5 points or the 5 stages of the path. These 5 points derived from the Mahamudra Respiration prayer. Right? So we're learning now at this moment how to go about transforming our mind stream by following the 5 stages of the path. In the last Dharma session, we already looked at the first among 5 points. That's the perfect support for the path. And the perfect support for the path, as it is explained in the Mahamudra Respiration prayer, is being free and well-favored, endowed with faith, exertion, and wisdom, relying on an excellent spiritual friend, and receiving the PIF instructions. So may we encounter there are no obstacles to practicing them correctly, and may we practice the Holy Dharma through all of our lives. So that's the 4th verse of the Mahamudra Respiration prayer that explains the first out of the 5 points of the stages of the path. That's the perfect support. And now we'll continue with the 2nd stage of the path.
다 니바디 람 똑제기 시랍스니 데숭교열에 다 데숭디 덴데기 람디 똑제디 가레기 똑고그래 스리디니 시랍디 귤레케비코니 람디 몬드체고그래 숭바레
Gonda Khenpo di Nipadian Kerchik Surunan Chagecheson.
람 똑제기 시랍스기발
Oh, that's a Degarandre. So the second point, the second stage of the path addresses wisdom, our intelligence, insight, the one that we all need to have in order to realize the goal of the path.
다디드니 자와낭라 롱리 퇴베 미시 디블레 명아삼베 태줌문나 좀 검중외기 닐루 지신설 셰랍 숨게 나와 개발쇼스니 드리송요레
The second stage of the path, the one that is concerned with our intelligence or prajna, wisdom, is explained in the 5th stanza of the Mahamudra Respiration prayer that reads, "Studying scriptures and reasoning frees from the obscuration of ignorance. Contemplating the oral instructions conquers the darkness of doubt. The light born of meditation illuminates the natural state just as it is. May the brilliance of the free prajnas, of the free wisdoms, increase."
다데 갑술라 조디 람 똑제디 셰랍레 데니 당아란수 닐룩 또 마투비에당 람디 랑귤라 게 마투팔라 바르체지기 디바 나바 수미레 숭바레 데니 디바 나바 숨보디 시랍 나바 숨 림바신도 랑귤라 게베코니 디바 나바 숨보디 파셀니 아니 람디 랑귤라 게고 그래서니 또 조디 땡겨래
What the verse teaches us, what the verse teaches us is that in order to accomplish the path, we need to rely on wisdom, on our insight. And we can see from these teachings and the Mahmud respiration prayers that when it comes to wisdom, there are a few obstacles. Actually, namely, there are 3 obstacles that don't let us realize the path, that don't let our wisdom dawn in our mind stream or us realize how things truly are. So those 3 obstacles are actually 3 types of obscurations, of veils that we have. And the verse continues and explains that if we give rise to the 3 types of insight, when we develop these 3 types of wisdom, they will clear away these 3 obscurations. So then we can all accomplish the path in that way.
다 kapsubabe ngaransu Gyud Lama ki chocha deshe nyingbu dagola chashaba ine. Ngaransu rangyu la sangi ki ranshin wesabati lundub ki tsuldu shukde yoba ine yang. Deni driba dinsu ki drib yongdu da pecho tang matu patawa da lega je matu patawa dinde ki kengi ngansu dunga nyongde bares. Da dinde ki shirab namba sumdi kebi koni drima dinsu pa seba ina deni Gyud Dewar Shebi Nimbu Kurangi Ranshindi ane tsu sewe koni deni Sanji Kopanti kondi chetu kure senda dus jarnayan digyore.
We can connect this point of wisdom with the main topic of our treatise, Gyud Lama, that is Buddha nature, our innate, inherent nature, which is clear light, luminosity. Right? We all have that as our innate, inherently present true nature. But due to these obscurations, veils, and it does not work, it does not manifest. Right? These obscurations that veil our true nature, so it does not really make itself present or evident. And because we're not in touch with our true nature, we all experience this kind of unnecessary, temporary suffering. So now what to do? Well, our main job is just to clear away those blockages, the one that prevent us to connect with our true nature. Once we clear away those obscurations, our Buddha nature will wake up. And because of that, we will actualize the natural state, or in other words, Buddhahood. So that's how it works, right, in relation to Buddha nature, for example.
Tachitang ngansu nangba sangi peki shuki nangla lam ki keje shiyongdu tab ingche chimbo tang shirab tongni tokpa siri ta dekni put nangla lam chasang di su du digyore. Petna ngansu parchin duk dinzu yang dekni ki nangla du chugore. Tini kebardu da lam dekniga gogyore. Yine yang nangba sangi peki tat chuluk segore. Tatub ki kapsula tumong mayin batawatita shirab di shiragi tsa chumbochita, nega chumbochita, dunge ki gyudan chebala tendu tarbeki tab chodo gyubatang dende ki driba tsawa ni mebar sobadi shirab reesnida shiragi chik tsadundu chigore. Chidan chuluk kanchu mangbola lam yoraba tabdan shirab ine yanda nangba sanji peki tini shirab sayadi nyumongi ngunin yinpa chik songza marikpa ki ngunin di shirab chadi ki yoba indu tini shiwaleyang junjukinala yinla dida tamjini tube shirab tundu sungsini parjin dukdinzoya tama tuksa di shirabla tukuguyo batang parjin shimba dinzoya parjin chadan misha sayadi shirabki zisinda masinda ralegi yosinida sanjeki shishingi dodang dine umeki tenju tensu nala shiragi dini gyachimusungore dinduda shirabdi yang tsadundu cheyedi namba sanji bagita taweki yang tumong mayimbi kiju dawa cheyan chati kore chidang.
Generally speaking, when the path explained in the Buddha Dharma is usually said to consist of two parts: the method, which is great compassion, and wisdom, which is the emptiness. So karuna, mahakaruna, and shunyata. We can say that all the practices, even the 6 paramitas, or the 6 transcendental perfections, could be condensed in these 2 points of method and wisdom. But if we want to say what is actually kind of something like a unique teaching of the Buddha Dharma, right? Of course, generally we need both method and wisdom. But if we were to emphasize what is absolutely indispensable for the Buddhist path, then all the Buddhist philosophers had said that the really main key point of the path is wisdom, the realization of emptiness. This is something that's very much emphasized in Buddhist philosophy, or we can say Buddhist tradition. Actually, the supreme method to do away with suffering and the causes of suffering once and for all is to realize emptiness, which is wisdom, right? In order to clear away all our obscurations, again, what we need is that wisdom. So really the actual real antidote to our afflictive emotions, and specifically to ignorance, is wisdom. Right? Of course, other religions, other spiritual traditions also talk about methods, compassion, love. They also have wisdom. But we can say that in Buddhism, it's very much highlighted, very much emphasized that wisdom is really has like the central place in the Buddha Dharma. We can see that when Shantideva in the Way of the Bodhisattva said that the first 5 paramitas, transcendental perfections, were taught by the sage, the Buddha, only for the sake of wisdom. So the other 5 practices are very important, but they were taught by the Buddha for the sake of wisdom. And actually, for those 5 practices to become real paramitas, to really become transcendental practices of perfection, they need to be embraced by wisdom. Otherwise, so they will not be paramitas. So actually, all those practices again depend on wisdom. That's how it is taught in Prajnaparamita Sutras. That's how it's taught in the Middle Way philosophy. So we can say that this is a very unique key point in the Buddha Dharma, this emphasis on wisdom.
나 지당 아주 가장 쉬인 쉐랍 세디 코랑 간디줄 세거레스 나더니 식라 삼당 바이나 쉐랍 세디 그지 뇌벽이 니수 하고그 여봤다 대나니 약슈지 임바다버지 된데질라니 쉐베나니 쉐바 랍밤 초도 주버지 된데질라 세거레 데 코랑야 생이 왕도 삼다오니 쉐랍도 남버 제바 스니 세거와
To understand this term, wisdom, or in Sanskrit actually it's prajna, right? Sharap in Tibetan. And this is something I already explained earlier, but to repeat myself, right? This sharap, that's the term in Tibetan. It consists of 2 syllables. She means the understanding, knowledge, and rap means the best, the supreme one. So what it means is that among all the different types of understanding, knowledges that we can have with regards to the true nature of phenomena, this one is the best understanding, the supreme one, right? That's what we call prajna, sharap, wisdom. And definition of it in the Buddha Dharma is that it is the perfect discernment of how between all phenomena. So perfectly discerning, discriminating between all various phenomena, that ability, discernment, that's what we also call prajna or wisdom.
다 딜라양 드니 아주 디 산로타에 디 산로 땅고에 주의를 가르에서나 아 당한주 지당 시에바 짬지기 디 펜톡 다 미토스에 디 테숨레 깝깝라 시에바 임발라 나라수 뇌게 켄트니 망보여라 봐 딘졸레 시랍세기요 말에 이나 데갑슬라타 랍세게 쳔디기 간르칠라 고고거스 나가주데 프라시냐 세딘디나라 스타 고디보다버체 바이나 딘데기 니수이디 수수 똑밤 하고 바이나 랑당 시 니가라 지 둥엘레 타르베기 아테니 탑시 딘데기 지 락바 딘데기 드니 셰바 지글라드니 셰랍세기도와 마도 양지 빼 짱보다버지 망보 하고겐 소다버지다 지니 깝깝라지 아주 미망보라 고거 땅켄다보다 미망보라 둥알 때켄 딘데게야 시에딘데 여러분 알아줄라 엔틴줄라다 베제 셰랍스니 알아비에서 말해 간다 도르디나 셰랍세데 거지 니수 망보지 하고 그래세 딘데짬지 많이 받지니 하고샤교디 란신 이게기 미세기 나라 베제 땅바이나 아니 둥아기 귤레기 탈베기 탑시지라고 이렇게 딜라티니 셰랍스기도 아티스디디 당아주 인지레네 지 knowledge 짱바 많이 받지니 딜레지 비주에 베그 knowledge 되니줄라 고알레 고멘도 됩니다.
Here there is one point we can think about, right? Just knowing something, will it be helpful or not, right? That's kind of unclear. It's not certain then just by knowing a lot about a topic, it's going to be beneficial for self and others. Actually, on contrary, it can be quite harmful, right? Can know how a lot and then misuse that knowledge to harm others. And that knowledge we're not going to call prajna. We're not going to call it sharap or wisdom, right? It is knowledge, but it's not used to help someone. This is not the definition of the Buddhist wisdom. So to really understand what is meant by prajna then is, well, it's only when we, by understanding the true nature of phenomena, right, by having that understanding, that knowledge, then using it as this, very skillfully to free self and others from misery, from pain, that, right, then we can call that wisdom, real prajna. Only when we know and then we use that to help self and others, to free self and others from suffering. Otherwise, just knowing a lot, being really smart, depends, or maybe being really cunning, kind of really clever, and then like using a lot of our smarts to kind of trick others or cheat others, right? There are such people like, really clever, knowing how to take advantage of others. Well, then that kind of like cleverness in we're never gonna call that prajna, right? That's not what we say then wisdom here as the kind of the stage of the path, right? So it's not just about then learning a lot, being educated well, studying a lot. Really, it's only when it's helpful or beneficial knowledge. In other words, when it's put to good use, when it gives us the methods to free ourselves and others from suffering. Only then, knowing those methods, we can then really call the knowledge prajna.
Tini da lakwardo dingsangi tusala ngaransu ki accessibility di shirake chimbochi chadi du pena ngarang rawa chashana da ngarang la mishebi tiba yorwa tintin re tiki ngarang la dunga mangu tiki were rete ine yang kap la nga mishebi ki semda le kyang denmebi ki chu mangbochi she dugudwa di semda che du pena ngarang su ina kala wale knowing too much like junk knowledge digi ngarang su ki energy dang space mangbochi sa dugudwa di indi kap la kanda da kasa warwe mikuwe ki chala di mangbo she dani digi jik ngaranzu la diba di che dawa semda dawa dine yungu duwa
Magyope chala di
ngaranzu la mikuwe ki knowledge mangbo chi
no.
di la gokor digi che du energy mangbo chi dosong dugu duwa di yang nyinga chi resha di indi da chida nganzu mishe pa di diba rete ini yang ji nangsul la samlo tang ba ina den mebe pe mangbo she den debe kya nyinga chenpo chi resha do tingsan di chela da accessibility di mangbo yo ba indi so di dordina knowing too much di yang nyinga chi re do lakwa du chu du di ka so da depa tang mekyu tang tinde ki lamni toko du den la parje chupo chi chi gri di
Karma chik shirana natsuki gyurve chikla. It's barche junson. I'll start. Lapsang, I hope you can catch up. So especially these days, we have another type of issue that we need to watch out for. That is easy accessibility to a lot of different types of information. Well, let's take me, for example. Of course, I have the obscuration of not knowing many things. I accept that. There's things I don't know. But you know, even more than that, what worries me is that I know a whole lot of useless information, like a junk knowledge. That actually is more dangerous, right? That gives me even more suffering and pain than not knowing something. Knowing too much, but that too much is like just a lot of useless things, unnecessary, not really beneficial type of information. The one that takes too much space in our minds, right? And then kind of takes a lot of energy. And of this useless knowledge that we all have, there's a lot of information that just uploaded into our minds, and then we get fooled by it and kind of lose our time. We are taking advantage by all of these different types of informations, and we waste our time on that, and that's really dangerous. It's really a big obstacle for the practitioners who follow the path of faith and devotion, right? So I'm more worried about that a lot of that junk information that we take in all the time rather than not knowing something.
Peshana ngaransu chidangni dunga lakwardu sengi dunga manchewati chigne ngaransu nilug mashe palatini chumbare rete ine ya cho chini samlotana beje meba pe mango shebe thoni sengi dunga manchewudwa chinsa tordina sheba da misheba nigi nani ani nigaki ngaransu dunga ki gyu yinba chikpa chagidu tindu ngaransu ki sheba se di filter che di peke chumbaredwa gari she gugu mintu sini nga zui na di dachi essential dawo dinsu ya damni rwa mato ani she jika mangbo ji sheba tsamchiki ngaransu la pentowe ngeba tsani yo mare.
So that kind of excessive knowledge gives a lot of mental suffering to all of us. Of course, we also suffer from ignorance of not knowing the true nature of reality. But also knowing too much useless stuff that also creates a lot of mental suffering for us. Actually, it's knowing too much and not knowing something equally serves as the cause of suffering. And that's why it's really important to filter what do we really need to know and only extract the essential knowledge, what without which we cannot do, in this life, and only take that. And otherwise not try to understand and get this knowledge about everything, right? What is not essential or what is actually not beneficial, what is in reality quite useless for us. So we need to be careful about that.
Tangi dorduna nangwa sanje beki sherap se di chik mangbo chik hago wa tindi chikla sige yo mare sarwa suso la chik ngone dani ki kwe di karitu tindi shekengi dini sheba tili sherap sige yo res di yewa che di kechumba res di chik nge zo shugo yo.
In short, the bottom line of what I'm trying to say is that in Buddhism, in the Buddha Dharma, what we call this prajna, that wisdom, is not just a lot of information or having a lot of knowledge, right? Of being very educated. This is not what we call prajna or wisdom. We need to distinguish. So another key point I'm trying to make is that we really need to distinguish between what we absolutely have to know to live, right? What's essential for us, beneficial for us, and what is not.
Laso ta nganzo tsikang tangbo di lungrik tebe mishi dible tol sungbare ta digi kare ten resina sherap sum nangni tangbo di kare resina tebe sherap sini sigware ta digi dini diba kare le dulgi resina mishi bi diba sedile dulgi re sungbare.
Now going to the verse from the Mahamudra prayer. The first line reads, studying scriptures and reasoning frees from the obscuration of ignorance. So this line talks about the first among the three types of prajna, or wisdom, the one that arises from studying. And that type of wisdom, that insight that comes from studying, it clears away the obscuration of ignorance, the obscuration of not knowing.
다 디나라 당고디 룽세 측지도아 되니 아주 퇴비 셔랍 세디 조 간지를 세교에서는 다 아주 고와들 세교래 간주지 라메기 샬니 퇴바이네레 수수기 뎁 베샬 로바이네레 간다지 로용디 수수기 셈나 남도지 샤용 그래 남도디 샤용디 가슬라 다디 딘데레샤 디디레 라비도 선베게 셈기 간라 미기 깨제 시용디 파주밀라 깨제지 고도 그러와 어디다 보들라 고와슬라 바래 또르나 퇴비 셔랍스디 고와지라 세교래
The text says that what we study is the scriptures, right? So actually this first type of insight, wisdom that comes from studying scriptures, is the same as what we call intellectual understanding, having intellectual knowledge. We could obtain that type of knowledge from hearing the teachings from a spiritual friend or from reading a book. Right? Basically, what is meant by this type of first insight is that having heard something or having read something, we have that understanding, that intellectual understanding. So it's actually just a concept like, oh, I got it, right? That kind of concept. Oh, I understand it now. So that conceptual understanding then is the first type of insight or wisdom, the one that comes from studying scriptures.
다 퇴바디 가왈레 제고 그래서나 되니 룽릭 스니 송샤디 룽당 리바니라 때니 텔라 퇴바체니 아니 퇴비시라비 끼고 그래 송바리
So not only scriptures, but also reasonings, different types of logical argumentations. So it's by studying, by reading, by hearing the teachings on the different scriptures or the logical arguments, reasoning, then we develop that first type of prajna.
다 룽스디 디갑스 조 가왈 거고 그랬으나 되는 가조다 룽스나 아주 쿵뚝사다 보지 아나서이나 지가 더 이지kel라이나 룽스나 지당 아주 이나 숨사다 원래 세계로와 something to hold on 조디 다디갑스 가왈 거고 그랬으나 상기기 깔라 순거여래 상기기 깔라 쿵뚝고 그래 숨바래 가르레스나다 상기 라니 람델라 친네 아니 상계사베 강사진디 다 딘데기 강사게 송샤바디 마늘 마트바 슝고와 딘데 이바디 데라 롱스 도르디나 롱스나 가스바베 상계기 깔라 대삼 제고 그래 숨바래
So this term translated in English as a scripture, to what we study, scriptures, right? Lung in Tibetan. It has actually also a meaning of something to hold on to, like a handle. Actually, another connotation of this term is a handle, something to hold on to. And here it refers to this kind of scriptural authority. Scriptural authority, the whole source actually of everything that, of all the scriptures. That's the teachings of the Buddha, the words of the Buddha. Right? So Lung here really refers to this kind of scriptural authority, or in other words, we can say like really authoritative here we go, authoritative text, or the words of the Buddha himself. Because what could be more authoritative than the words of the Buddha? Because the Buddha is someone who has already traversed the whole path. He has gone to the end of the path, so he knows it from A to Z. So he's the one that we can rely on to, right? He is the best scriptural authority for us. So here, therefore, this word scripture has all of those kind of meanings, right? Something to hold on to, and what we're really holding on to is this really scriptural authority of the words of the Buddha.
Tatani nipadi lung set nala kari yoresana. Ta sanje ki kadi shiraki gyachumbuchiredu. Tini ngarangi lobchon chaye kale kabudu tingiwe na. Tini kari chegoresana. Nipadi tenjue la. Tini lobchon changu gore sungare. Ta sanje ki ka gyachumbudu tsu du shabatan. Sabu ngaranzu to matoba tinzu. 진주 개바든지 독자와당 시럽게 거니 아니 고대오 아니 고리미야 양 야보지니다 딕샤베기든줄라 답변은 알아서다 왔는다 귤라마다와 차샤와는 귤라마게 주제든지 산제기 도가와 가서나는 손샤교래 아니 지진 잠바고모 그 주루루서 샤바라와 마도 알아서기 산제랑게 도디 로고 중나 아니 빼망고 증아주 로고 도 그래 둔다양 수도도서 두고 말해 Oda dende gitini tenjue dinzulayang lung segere. Da tordina lung nangla kadan tenjue nigala dudigere. Dela ntesamchi tebachi gugere sumare.
And then the second meaning of lung, or the scriptures, is it refers to the commentaries on the words of the Buddha. And this is so because when it comes to the teachings given by the Buddha himself, they are extremely vast. The collection of sutras, tantras, is really vast and also profound. It's not that easy to understand everything, right? There's a lot of difficult points, and also it's really difficult for us to study all of that vast and extensive scriptural collection of the words of the Buddha. So now, because the followers of the Buddha, the learned, accomplished masters, were very kind, and based on their love and wisdom, they made it, they put it together in a very clear, precise, very, structured way. And that's what we call treatises, the commentaries on the words of the Buddha. Because even think about this treatise, the Gyud Lama, Uttara Shastra. If you were concerned with this topic, right, the Buddha nature, and you want to study it based on the words of the Buddha himself alone, you will have to go through many various sources of the sutras, and here is a little bit in this sutra Buddha addressed it, and then he addressed it in another sutra, and it's all over those various collections of sutras, and it's really hard to really put it all together and make it like in a really good, proper order. But that's what the protector Maitreya did. The Lord Maitreya, he did that for us in this treatise of Gyud Lama, right? So now we can study it, and the whole topic of Buddha nature is extremely clear. It's in the right order. So we wouldn't be able to do that, right? If we wanted to study just the sutras and understand the topic of the Buddha nature, we won't be able to summarize it in this really neat way for ourselves or for others. But the masters of the past did that for us, and that's what we are now concerned with studying the scriptures, which is also refers then to the treatises, like this one, for example.
Di nganzu ngangi da genduk chonyi la soba kona ba ngoni tani shiragi karin chumbare karresana peche mangbo log mago ba 아니 peche peche logon di dinala ni kibu chungoni, kibu chimbo, kyaptoni, sanjiji kopa, tobe partulake lamgi rimba chasang pe yapochini kodewo, korim tiku sung shakwa tinsu, karin chimbo shirare, kari resana, ta tencho di mebachini ngaransu ki sanjiji katinsu loo chungna, ngone dani tangbo ni duswe dangi marela, nini gotsugu marela, sumni dini chasangji chori jeba chungna, shirage kale khakure, tindi konamba, ngone karin chimbo rela, tencho se diyantini, sanjiji ka nanshinji tsini, 아니 짜침부지 찌고 그랬으니 근데 지준 잠바 공부게 쇼디 나라더니 송여래.
I think tamadi da sangigi kanan shin tsine gushapchi tenchodi karechagure.
텐주에대야 산지제 까나신지니 구셔침부 찌고 그래서
Awesome. Yeah. So we really ought to be really grateful to the accomplished and learned masters of the past who composed those treatises based on the words of the Buddha. Right? It's really thanks to their great kindness that now we can just study like one volume, right, of a treatise and really see the whole path starting from refuge up to the Buddhahood, right, in one volume. Actually, it even addresses those of the lesser skills or those of the higher acumen. So the whole path for everyone, depending on their abilities, can be found in just like, let's say, one treatise, which is extremely clear, structured, right? Think now about like studying if you didn't have those treatises like that. Now, if you just were studying the sutras, the words of the Buddha, that will be extremely difficult to have this whole path from A to Z, from refuge to the result of Buddhahood in this really clear and neat order for you to like get it in sutras. You first of all, you won't have time to study all of the sutras to kind of extract those main points of the path. Second, even if you had all the time on your hands, you wouldn't understand it because the sutras are not that easy to decipher often. And third of all, even if you understood, you wouldn't be able to put it in the correct order, right? Following this really nice and neat structure. But the masters who were already very learned and realized they did it for us. So we need to see, therefore, the treatises, these commentaries, being as valuable as the words of the Buddha. And we need to pay to them respect, just like we respect the sutras or the words of the Buddha.
다디치 타니바델라 릭스도아 릭바 세드레 다오나 룽짱바 라테나 드니 디기레베스나 다 디기요 말에 당기요 말에 ngaransu 룽짱발라 이치 제투브나 약보다라와 이나 미차상기 드니 이치 제투베 그 수남 연구 말에 독바 망보 연구래 태순 망보 연구래 다 딘수 세발 제발라 드니 가르고 그래 릭발레 팅고 그래 숨바래 teni rikpa setuita mang chebade chowdi tenju dinsu nangla kombo lutup da ani cholang da chota da kona mege chi gorim chi tiksha yarwa oda tende rikpa kin rodan chi gorim tiksha dinsu la teni teni tulba cha kareredu matube cha kareredu sedi an susu gi yewa che gu gore sini sumare.
The second point that what we need to study here is translated as reasoning. So this term, reasoning, basically what it means is that, well, for some beings, for some disciples, it's not enough just to read the treatise and to kind of like completely put all one's trust in the treatise without relying on one's own we can say discernment, right? On one's own logical abilities. Some beings don't have that merit to just trust like what was taught already in the treatise and take it at face value from the beginning. So therefore, those other disciples, well, which is many of us, right, who have this kind of doubts, really, is that true what's said in the treatise? Maybe it's not true, right? We have those kind of concerns. And to clear away those concerns, we need to rely on reasoning. right? We don't just rely on scriptures, authority, like, oh, it is said so, so it must be so. But we also rely on this kind of ability to discern for ourselves. And that ability comes from studying logical arguments, reasonings, found in the treatises of Dignaga, Dharmakirti, Nagarjuna. So those great masters of the past, they made it very clear what is this logical arguments that we can then use and see for ourselves. Oh, what is correct? What is incorrect? What is confusion and what is truth? Right? We can then distinguish based on those types of reasoning that we can use ourselves.
다 대양되는 지당아주 낭베기 슝게 나라 리퀘스트 랍디 율 샬자스기르와 샬자딜 숨미레 숨바레다 망보여르데 지당 리기고니 예와다고 제바이나 원규르세주레스 꼭규르세지다 신도 꼭규르세기 근데 율숨미레스 라바다 아주 리바땅도 차상나 집바땅는 연구 말아봐 율 민다와라 리바야 민다와지 땅고 거래 되니 원규르기 쳬디줄라 아니 아주 원숨기 리밤 원숨체마스 꼭규르기 쳬디네 쳬레다 딘주 아주 직 미기 수통와다와 나웨 다텨바다와 되니 아주 리바땅교요 말에 이내야 리바땅교요래 딜라카레스는 되니 따땅 댄식 된들라 되니 아니 두 여바레 메바레 트루바레 마투바레 lokbare yangdakbare sene nga zu tache tang chu go re yul khorang ngsu ma thon na ya tak tang tensik tang gyumsen tang tendela jesu pa ne dela jebak ripa sigwa deni ta di ni na la chitang du du gre ta ine yang deni ta nisu khashe jik deni shindo ko gyur den de yures la bare passionan ta di chi nga zu lung ngusum ge yang thong to ku marela jebak ke rikpa ke yang kala kansam ji ma to ji ki 세부 두베 카포여레 가르레서 그 시라기 타워지레 나란수기 로디 시라기 체진지라와 근데 임바인데 다 딘주기 들라니
Not so logically.
아주 로디 그 체당제바 리미티드
last.
아니 덴데기 뉴스 딘줄라 아니 아주 룽라테니 도구거레 송바레 다 도디나 샤자 원줄 딘줄라 원숨게 릭밤 원숨세만 베제다 샤자 꼬규르게 차든 줄라 제바스만 베졌다. 니 샤자 신도 꼬규르든 줄라 롱세만 베졌다 버터니 아니 니셰디 끼고 그래서 델라카르스 그래서는 리파스 라바리.
There is more to be said about reasoning, this term Rigpa reasoning. And because in the Buddha Dharma we divide that logic, that reasoning into different categories depending on what is being evaluated by that reasoning, that kind of logic. And we talk about, of course, there are multiple objects that we're going to evaluate using our own discernment, right? Our reasonings. But we sort of in the Buddha Dharma primarily talk about 3 types of objects that are being investigated by reasoning. The first object is something that is evident. It's something that is directly observable, we can say. The second type of object is something that's hidden from our faculties. And the third type of object is something that's extremely hidden. So let's address these 3 types of objects and what kind of reasonings then we use to really analyze those objects. Well, for the objects that are directly observable, right, the ones that are really right there, the evident, manifest objects, we use what is known as the direct valid cognition. That means we can directly analyze that object with our eyes, or maybe we can with our ears, right, if it's a sound. So we can use this direct valid cognition to determine the status, the nature of that kind of object. But some objects cannot be seen, they cannot be heard, right? That's the hidden, concealed objects, the second category. And here we can still resolve their status, their nature, but not using the direct valid cognition, but using inferential valid cognition. That's to say that we use inferences, signs, right? And we can still use our logic, even though we don't see that object, but we can still use our logic based on those inferences, on those signs, right? We can still then investigate the nature of the object and see, oh, is it something authentic and real or not? Is it true, or maybe it's fake? Is it existent? Is it non-existent? Even though we don't perceive that object directly with our sense faculties, we can still use our own reasoning to analyze and determine its true nature. So we use that type of reasoning, and we call it inferential valid cognition. And basically that sort of mostly summarizes all the objects that we deal with, right? What we try to evaluate, investigate. But there are some that are extremely hidden. Some objects of knowledge cannot be perceived with our sense faculties, and neither they can also be understood or inferred to with our own logic or signs or inferences. Like, we can't even infer to them, right? Clearly. To some degree we can, but really clearly resolve their nature we can't. So what to do? Well, and we can't because Khenpo said, because, well, we have limited capacity of our minds. That's why we can only to some degree resolve that status of that very, very hidden object of knowledge. But we can still understand how it is, and that understanding comes based on scriptural authority, scriptural statements. So here we have to trust the scriptural statements, right? Because we ourselves cannot really understand the true nature of those extremely hidden objects of knowledge.
Teni dachidang azu nangba sanje pala lungdang rikpa ni sini yongda dabarwa lungri kitten la pakku gare sedre. Teni kap la yang lungri pe sini yang pe shagre. Chidang pe di jeba tseme nangla yore. Ina yang kap la teni lung rikpa pe sini. Ti yang neka ke chumbo chik tonggudu. Lakwar tu ngana zu teba chumbo ki chue cheken ina. Karare sina pe se di lung mare rikpa yang mare ina yang ko shita gini nipa chumbo chuyore yang. Nilu topala. Pe koni tini di yang di ko ta tablam jire duwa ngote che, nilu ngote che di. Ta di kapsu pe se di nga zu symbolism.
So mostly we can say then when it comes to studying the Buddha Dharma, everything is incorporated into studying scriptures or then reasoning, right? Studying by means of this kind of reasoning. But sometimes there is a third element that's added, which is neither scripture nor reasoning, and this is known as symbolism. And we could also say that generally symbolism is part of inferential valid cognition, where we use signs and inferences, right, to investigate phenomena. But it could also have its own place, separate from reasoning, especially for the Mahayana practitioners, right? Sometimes it's not enough to study or rely on scriptural statements or use our own logic, but sometimes we need to be pointed out to how things really are skillfully, and that pointing out happens by means of symbolism. Like, symbols are used to really show, to illustrate what is the natural state of phenomena, so that we can come to realize it, because sometimes scriptures and reasoning is not enough for us to realize the natural state of phenomena.
Kap la tini nganzu the verbal language yorwa. Dile kyang symbolic language di shiraki tini direct tang nipa chimbo yore sumbare. Tini imba intu tini nganzu nga ke kapsula mang cheba di symbolic language di pichu tang yorwa.
Sometimes verbal language cannot do what symbolic language does. Sometimes symbolic language is much more direct and powerful, and that's what is mostly used in the tantras, right? In the tantric tradition, it's really the symbolic language that directly and powerfully points us to how things truly are.
Pena ngazu nangba ki truptan nangla chasha kwa ina ngone chena dote pa se shorwa truptan nipa ani kong namba ki chue di shebe kapsula pegi koni chue mangpo shigyo re sungbare ani koranzu ki kapkawla tanye ki mingchigla petun pa segre sungbare dene sanje ki dote dinsu mangpo nangla pegi koni chue di sungyo re peche da gyaga gengema ena ngazu samden pa segre wa tingsan da ngazu dini dian segre wa gyaga kela andi tingsan da Japan da kuda gyana de wala ngazu zen se tingsan kira chumba wa Koran yang ta tingkyu dire dwa dote pa dabu chene chi six mangbo me ba ko chi nganso ine direct pit instruction da pe ko ne ani ngote che ti beje mangbo tang dwa
For example, there is one among the four philosophical tenets of the Buddha Dharma. The second one, the Swatantrikas, the sutra followers, who rely heavily on the usage of these kind of analogies, symbolism, to explain the key points of the Buddha Dharma, right? So they were not really using a lot of verbal language, but they used a lot of these analogies, examples. So it's basically their second name of the school. They're also known as the sutra followers, but they're also known as the ones that showed by means of analogies. That's like their second name, right? And also the other tradition in the Buddha Dharma, the one that went to China and Japan, we know it as Zen in the West. That tradition of Zen also heavily relies on this kind of symbolic introduction, like direct PIF instructions without using many words, right? That's what they do also a lot there.
ina ya nganzu begi da vajrayana dorji theba ki symbolic language di da pena zen ki symbolic language ni kala di thonang de la dis kebar do wa mi yu chi pa ta we ba ina ya di zen gi di to simplicity aspect de do wa no koran ki language di symbolic language di da nganzu vajrayana di complexity aspect of language di Nika symbolic de chipare.
So in Tibet, the Vajrayana, the Vajra vehicle, also uses a lot of symbolic language, right? As we said, the Tantras use the symbolic language, just like Zen tradition. So even though the goal of both traditions of Zen and Vajrayana is the same in terms of why they use the symbolic language, but the way they use it is really completely different. Zen, their symbolic language has a very strong aspect of simplicity, where when it comes to Vajrayana in Tibet, that symbolic language is much more in its aspect, it relies on complexity rather than simplicity.
Tachidang azu di complexity dang simplicity aspect di nangba sangje pa ki ngazu ina the two sides of coin segirwa nika tinire de ngara su chidang je ba ina dini do di karres na simplicity aspect in sla pare nga di complexity aspect in sla pare korani neka di chipa yin bala dini di thaplam di minda ba yin su pare.
Actually, complexity and simplicity are just the two sides of the same coin. We can say in the Buddha Dharma, the sutric vehicle is much more in its essence that of simplicity, where the tantric vehicle and its language is much more diverse and complex. So even though they are in essence kind of same teaching, but the method of how this teaching is delivered is different.
Penanda Nindi kanchi shuki yasana yang ting sangda nga ranzu kanda ji mi mangpa chigi nga dan treba chado yorwa, dis kena yorwa re. Mi mangpa chigi nga ki nyamlen da chig ritual da, tanga da, la daminda da, kilko la soba da, soba soya dine mangpa chiyore da, dinzu di chi rikshung ji re sene pe chi te tsam ji mato samlok kor mato bayi na, yang dis tegi ma di kanti dengo re sene, di dan dorje tekpa korang ki language re sene hakuya di pe nega chimbo re, symbolic language. Pena Mahamudra se tsi korang kar redu pe kone ming takpa redwa. Vajrayana se tsi korang kar re symbolic re. Ming korang symbolic re. Di indu di nganzu dingsang culture segirwa, rikshung segirwa, dinde rang chi didan deba yoye dire ini yang di tsam chi mare, di le kyang shiraki saba chi nganzu samlo tango re. Di korang ki chi karlo nganzu ta language lamna yaksho insare. Vajrayana korang ki ta kerang la chi gowa chi te gugurwa, nganzu dana gowa segirwa, tebi shirab segirwa. Di ani verbally maimba chi ni symbolic teki yore. Ta nganzu wang nang se damina segirwa chasang dire da. Di korang language chi yimba di nguzin che tuwe di nega shimbore. Ta di language di nganzu jang gugudwa, majang na shegi mare. Pena ngaranzu lungba shimba chil dowa ina ke lamsang ha gugumarwa, gochu gugumarwa. Ke di dangbo go ndi pe kensaburaba shigidwa. Ani shini jang yongdi ani paju shuzu niga chi lega chi chigirwa. Da di ke shimbore, di ndi. Ta nganzu chi mandal se, tawa tang, tini cham se, tawa tang, choba tsuye tang, torma tang, ta karimbo kari laba ina ya, chasang di kari chagi warisana. Ko di language chigiri. Kerang la, donta chi gojuye ke tarshi chigiri. Na koranzu verbal pecho tangi yo mara kari resana, ta di saba indi symbolic pecho tangba ina nyuba cheba tang, norsa meba tang, dinde ki kecho mambu cheba suna di pecho tang, ta di hakuya di nega chiredwa.
So why am I explaining this? Because many people these days are connected with the Tantra teachings, interested in it, practicing it. So it's important to understand, because when it comes to Tantric teachings of Vajrayana, everything is made of these complex rituals, ceremonies, pujas, empowerments, mantras, mandalas, dances, lama dances, tormas, I mean, you name it, right? It's so, all of that is actually a symbolic language that Tantra uses to give us understanding, right? We're talking about the first progeny of understanding. And to think that all of those aspects are just merely a culture, it's not okay. We need to really understand that all of these mantras and mandalas and ceremonies and music played, incense, all of that is the language that makes us understand Tantra. It's just not the verbal language, it's a symbolic language. And, even when it comes to the name Mahamudra, the name is given based on the symbol, Great Seal. Vajrayana, the Vajra vehicle. Again, it's a vehicle of Vajra. Right there, you can already see there is a symbol right in its name. And of course, many of us think, it's all just connected to culture. And it is connected to culture, but it's not just that. It's not only culture, right? So if we do want to get that understanding, right, that first wisdom that comes from from studying, which is, I told you already, it's the wisdom of just having that understanding. We want to understand Tantra. Well, we need to go through that symbolic language and learn it, right? When the empowerment is giving, this is already communication that's happening to us, so we can understand. It's just not verbal communication, right? It's a symbolic language. And just like any language, it takes time to learn. Like when you travel to a new country, you don't arrive there and in 2 days you learn the language of that country, new country to you. It involves a lot of work, right? It's hard work, you need to learn it. So same, the symbolic language of tantras is something that will take time to learn, and if we're really interested in tantra, there's no way around, because this is the way tantras communicate. It's through lama dance, it's through making dharma, it's through doing the puja, it's giving empowerment, right, building mandala. So that language then explains to us what the verbal language fails to do. So actually, because the tantras are so much more profound, the symbolic language is set to match it much better. It's also much more profound, and it's not so much prone to misunderstanding, like the verbal statements can be misunderstood easily. The symbolic language is not like that. So that's why, that's how tantras communicate, and if we're interested, that's what we need to learn.
Tene indu ta nganzo chitang mikashi hops kala ngaki tan tu yongdu ani pe it's very strange sigirwa. Tadi dembare karresana pena nganzo ki susu ki kyone gonyu megyo ki keikji language ji go yongdu kapsala pe ken sabodawo yam sabodawo shigido warwa. lungba tsani korang gonyu megyo ki lungba dinde keji godi, it sounds very strange sigirwa. Di nashin chire.
Some people, when they encountered all this ritualistic complex side of the Vajrayana, they say, oh, it's so strange, it looks bizarre. Well, it's true. Just like if you encounter a language that you have never heard before, ever, and suddenly someone speaks it, it will be like, oh, what's that? That sounds strange, right? We might say that. So we might say the same about the Vajrayana language.
Tangi dundadi chidang tumong la lungdang rigpa ni la thoba je kugre sumbarwa ngaso thebe shirab keji shebe kabrwa. Ine yang kap la lungdang rigpa pesani yungre. Labar do nganso nga nyamlen je yong ditini pe se di ta nga chajin joshi nyamlen je di pe nega chobare karesna Quran so gida fundamental language Quran di pe di cha di yo ba indi di hak ko di kechum bajre dinde imba indi tanga chu dogi lungda rigpa lobjong jangba chamji digiyo mare nga la shu gu na tangbo nga ki language di janggu do wa pena nga chu tangbo da ji ke khora ma she pa na di ya dewa je thu maro communicate je thu maro wa nga ran su nga tsani nyamnyung men hops nga la shu ni go ma su ke man she ba di da di language di ma she bare pena nga ran su ji ke tsani ma she ke lungba chile chi 아니 파주미 랍요 수 고마고 수주미 라마게 완난교데 로마마고 로마게 제교데 라마고 마시온데 아니지 디 miscommunication 차로도 아디 남모마부 차로 그래 나라야 다디 마차발라 당보디 language 디 야고 장고도 봐 어디 인디 사마데니 롱다 리퀘스트 안다 디나르다 수미도 이네 페세디니 나게 카솔라타 가왈레 퇴바치고 그래서나 벨라 퇴바치고 그래서 와 대수 차상기 치기 가르친 거래 난기 가르친 거래 사회 가르친 거래서 이 차상나 치 낭상숨스니 된지니 the language 코랑기 layer 다고든지 요래 라 나 된수 장나더니 오늘 다니기다 나기람나 슈바이나 야고 communicate 배 야고 차기
So the meaning of what I'm saying is that when we study scriptures and reasoning, right, when it comes to developing the first type of insight wisdom, we can also add their symbolic language, like studying scriptures, reasoning, and symbolism, especially if we want to study and understand, get that understanding of the tantric traditions of the great perfection, Mahamudra. Right? There's no way around but to learn the symbolic language, because that's how those teachings are delivered. For sutric teachings, the sutra level teachings, we study scriptures and reasoning. But if we are entering onto the path of the tantric teachings, there is absolutely no way around but to learn the symbolic language of tantras. Otherwise, it's like going to a new country, not knowing language, and then, of course, failing to communicate with the others. Like, you can't communicate without having that some kind of common language. So same here for the tantras. Without understanding the symbolic language of tantras, showing up in some empowerment, not knowing what's going on, who is this teacher, what is the teacher doing, I don't understand what I'm supposed to do. Well, you fail in that regards to receive that empowerment, because there's a lot of miscommunication that happened, because you didn't know that symbolic language, you didn't study it before coming to the empowerment. So if we really want to engage with the tantric teachings, we absolutely need to learn the symbolic language of the tantras. Otherwise, a lot of miscommunication is going to happen, and that's going to be problematic for our path. So when we study this language, of course, there's inner symbolism, outer, inner, secret, innermost symbolism. There are layers to, like, just any language has layers. So symbolic language has that kind of layers. And so for us to really study the tantras, we need to study that language so that we will have a really good communication between us and the tantric path.
다 begin nangden teba chimbo ki chu donga chasangdi yapoji ni jango do tena azu language mangboji jango do wa diskale 가고 여래 준지 제고 그래 당보 베게지 jango 그래 디니 팔게지 jango 그래 디니 최게지 jango 그래 디니 도게게지 장 디니 nga게게 nga khoranglada chinang sansum지 jango di ke rimba mangboji do 그래.
And if you are really interested to engage with the Tibetan Buddhism, I'm afraid there's a lot of studies that will have to happen. Like, you will need to learn Tibetan language. Well, I don't know about need. Khenpo saying if you are learning Tibetan language, well, there is a colloquial, like the spoken Tibetan language. Then there is the Dharma language, and it doesn't stop there, because there are so many different contexts, like the Sutric Dharma language. It's completely different when you enter into the Tantric Dharmic language. And there you have the outer Tantras, and it's one type of language. And then you have inner Tantras, and that's another type of Tibetan language. Basically, yes, that's true. There's a lot of studies of Tibetan language that's going to happen there.
Nangju jangbar jebala da halam kirik number duk dunji jangu
It's basically studying Tibetan, Buddhism. Studying Tibetan is equal studying around 6-7 different languages.
라소 다티니 테베 미시 팁레토스 다 롱릭라 테바제 용디 아니 디바숨기나니 테비 셰랍기 용디 디바숨기나니 가레기 디발레토 그래서는 미셰비 디바스 라바르다 미셰바스나 닐루 미셰바 랑도르기 네 미셰바 상에 미셰바 다 다음에 뭐 요초거와 테바제 용디 뜻상 하고 용거래 대사 도르드나 셰랍 숨기 나니 테비 셰랍 세드레스 데 랑귤레기 용도 디바 가리 도그레스네 디바 숨미오게 나니 당보 미셰비 디바를 도그레스 말에.
All in short, and the first type of insight or prajna that we develop clears away the first among the three obscurations, the obscuration of not knowing. That could refer to not knowing the natural state of reality, how it is. It could refer to not knowing what to accept and practice and what to reject and avoid. It could refer to not knowing what is actually good and what is bad. All of that is what we call ignorance or not knowing in this context. And so then when we do study what we just talked about, scriptures, reasoning, symbolic language, what happens is that that type of wisdom of knowing, of understanding is dawned in our mind stream, and when it develops, it clears away that first type of obscuration.
다소 다들인 아주 더디나 람도제기 셰랍 세야들 셰랍 수미요레스 근데 나는 당보디 가르레스나 퇴비 셰랍레 수마레 다디 셰랍 세야디안데니지 망고 하고 바치를 쓰기요 말에 수술랑 고에기더니 둥알 세비기 탑 셰비기더니 데리치라 셰랍 세기요레스 데니 델라더니 lungdang rikpa pe sumla ani thosam chebe kone ani sherabdi rangula kegu gore sin sumare.
In short, today, in today's Dharma session, we have learned about the first type of wisdom, insight, prajna, the one that arises from studying. And that kind of insight, remember, it's not the same as just knowing a whole lot of bunch of information. It's not knowing too much. It's just knowing what is relevant. And by relevance, we mean knowing the methods to clear away the suffering of self and others. So that's what kind of, insight we are talking about here. The one that then enables us to get free of suffering and help others. And that type of insight, prajna, comes from studying what? Studying scriptural statements, scriptures, studying reasonings and symbolic language of tantras.
Janju senju rimbo je mage banam ge gyore je geba nyambara meba yang gone gongdo pelabare sho